Welcome to the Belly Button Window channel and episode 38 of the Jimi Hendrix story, like you've never heard it before. In this episode, we deep dive into September and October of 1969, including the United Bloc Association benefit concert, the Salvation Club gig, and Jimi's reputed kidnapping. Please remember to check the channel's community tab and video information page, where you will find links to related videos, performances, and stunning photographs from the period. According to Hendrix author John McDermott, by September of 1969, and following Jimi's Woodstock performance, his recording sessions, once the sole bastion of sanity within his professional life, had progressively grown unruly and unproductive. There were 15 to 18 people hanging all over him in the office on 37th Street, remembers Bob Levine. What we needed was to get Eddie Kramer out of the Electric Lady Studios construction and back with Jimi. Hendrix's sessions had become nothing more than unproductive and expensive parties. Eddie was very intimidating in those days. Jeffrey may not have cared for him, but Kramer was never afraid to tell someone to go F themselves and get out of his studio. Hendrix was very scattered, recalls Jim Marron. Drugs had become a vehicle to escape his problems. He was using anything he could get his hands on, 3 to 5 times a week. Drugs were fast becoming a way of life. Since Noel Redding's defection in July, Hendrix was steadily unraveling. To his legion of followers, all seemed normal. But just below this thin veneer of adulation, Hendrix seemed on a fast track to self-destruction. Most distressing was his upcoming trial in Toronto, which through any means necessary, he sought to block from his mind. However, with his judgment soon due, Hendrix remained convinced he faced a stiff penalty. He was truly frustrated, remembers Jerry Stickles, and he was going through a period where he felt he couldn't write anything. Everything seemed the same as before. He was bored and directionless. While for Mike Jeffrey, his relationship with Hendrix was fast disintegrating, and with his cash flow stretched to its limits by his artist's inactivity and the studio's ceaseless expenses, Jeffrey braced himself to battle with 2 prominent newcomers on the horizon, Buddy Miles and Alan Douglas. Also by this time, both Warner Brothers and Track Records were hopping up and down for some new material. Jimi had been promising all kinds of projects to the press, but nothing had been delivered. Fragments of songs were liberally sprinkled through hundreds of hours of tape, so in order to satisfy the record companies, Jimi would have to produce 2 albums worth of new songs, as Ed Chalpin had first call on the next Hendrix album, and he too was getting impatient. To plug the gap, Smash Hits was released in the summer and did very good business on both sides of the Atlantic, and later in the year, Track released Fire and the Burning of the Midnight Lamp as a filler. While on the other side of the Atlantic, things weren't going all that well for Noel Redding, who, in his autobiography, in a moment of self-reflection, had this to say: "It came as something of a surprise to discover how easily and effectively you can be destroyed by getting what you want. Adulation in particular sets you apart from reality, and more devastatingly, from the relaxed sincerity of close friendships. No one sympathizes because you are envied, not liked, and come to despise yourself for daring to be distressed when your dreams come true, for not continuing to thrive and improve on your success. Some people find depression creative, but I just find it depressing." I sat, usually alone, getting drunk on pints of vodka and ginger beer day after blurred day, but the alcohol didn't even touch the residual leapers, though it blotted out the brain just fine. I'd lost the urge or the ability to think ahead, only being called back by the necessity of getting the mattress together. I threw myself completely into interviews, photo sessions, and the many exciting possibilities for Noel's future Chaz raved on about in his press releases. I wanted it to be true. While Mitch Mitchell recalled, "After Woodstock I stayed over for quite some time in New York. I was in a hotel and Jimi still had his little apartment in the Village. We were checking out studios basically. The Hit Factory, the record plant. But that was winding down for us. Jimi definitely wanted to stay in New York, but it was a difficult time for me. I'd bought a house in England and I'd hardly lived there. Jimi was all over the place, mentally and physically, but he did want to stay in New York, which was definitely encouraged by Mike Jeffrey. Jimi had been going through this strange thing, exemplified by the Woodstock band, of being almost fixated with being reunited with people from his past. Billy Cox, fine, good bass player, but Larry Lee, I think he realized that he made a mistake, although he did do some recording with them in the month after Woodstock, but later things got trimmed down. I went back to England. if only to spend some time in my house, but we stayed in contact by phone. He carried on working with Billy Cox and Buddy Miles. Why not? It certainly seemed to make sense at the time. Wednesday, the 3rd of September. Jimmy does an interview and press conference for the United Block Association at Frank's Restaurant, Harlem. Then Thursday, the 4th, at the Hit Factory, working on Jam Back at the House and Mastermind. Friday, the 5th of September, the United Block Association Benefit Concert, Harlem, New York. Concert setlist: Fire, Foxy Lady, Star Spangled Banner, Purple Haze, Red House, Voodoo Child, Slight Return, and Machine Gun. Mitch recalled, "It was a free gig on the back of a flatbed truck, as a benefit, as I remember, for a free clinic. Jimmy and I drove up through Central Park in the afternoon in his Stingray and parked on a street in Harlem. We'd only got 20 feet from the car when this group of like 10-year-old kids stole Jimmy's guitar, which was on the back seat. It turned out that the guys who were putting on the gig were the Allen twins, also known as the Ghetto Fighters, and old friends of Jimmy's, and their family ran the block. Apparently at that time, various families ran maybe 2 or 3 blocks of Harlem each. Anyway, the Allen twins caught the kids, and it was like, do you know whose guitar that is? So we got it back, but I think if it hadn't been one of his favorites, Jimmy would have probably said, oh, let him keep it. I think he gave them money anyway. We did the gig, and it was like a big street fair. We played for an hour or something like that, and it was fine except that a couple of eggs got thrown. Never knew if they were aimed at me being the only whitey on stage, but they only hit some amplifiers in any case. The Allen twins caught whoever did it, and proceeded to beat the shit out of them. That was the only time I played in Harlem, but I had a great time whenever I went up there." While Charles R. Cross wrote, "Trouble began to brew before Jimmy even took the stage. He was standing with Carmen Barrero, watching the other bands when several people chastised him for having a Puerto Rican girlfriend. They saw Jimmy with what they thought was a white bitch, and they threw stuff at me," Barrero recalled. Carmen's blouse was ripped in the tussle that broke out. Hendrix had agreed to perform a benefit concert for Harlem's United Block Association, which was located on 139th Street and had a long history of organizing street fairs and block parties. To publicize Hendrix's appearance at the UBA benefit, a press conference was scheduled for September 3rd at Frank's Restaurant on 125th Street in Harlem. Here, Hendrix announced his hope that his performance could help the community and that the spirit embodied at Woodstock could extend to Black Americans. "This is a crusade," Jimmy remarked. "Why be selfish? There are a lot of black people who haven't been included yet. This is all in the womb stage. POP, I call it, Pilgrimage of Peace." The restaurant was crowded with mainstream press, peppering Hendrix with questions. One reporter asked him to compare the UBA benefit in Harlem with Woodstock. "I don't know," Jimmy replied. "Forget about comparing. That's where we make our biggest mistake, trying to put our ego against other persons. That's why I can't find out who is better, B.B. King or Segovia. They're both masters. They're both kings. Why go through, he can play that note, but he's louder there." Another reporter inquired about Hendrix's rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. "Because we are all Americans," Jimmy replied. "We are all Americans, aren't we? When it was written, it was very nice and beautifully inspiring. Your heart throbs and you say, great, I'm American. Nowadays, we don't play it to take away any of the greatness America is supposed to have. We play it the way the air is in America today, and that air is full of static." On September 5th, the atmosphere on 139th Street was electric as members of the United Block Association's crew busily supervised the fair. Jimmy and his entourage arrived late, so to avoid stalling the proceedings, the organizers asked Big Maybell, the headlining act, to take the stage first. "When we arrived," recalled Jerry Stickles, "there was pressure from the Black Panthers. All of the white guys had to hide in a burned-out, defunct laundry until it was time to go on. We had to set up the gear quickly because people were throwing stuff and spitting on us." Greeted by a smattering of applause, Hendrix's Gypsy Sons and Rainbows took the stage. As they readied themselves to play, some unruly audience members hurled eggs at the makeshift platform, landing harmlessly near Mitchell's drum kit. Once underway, charged with emotion, Hendrix led his expanded ensemble through his various hits as well as Voodoo Child, which Jimmy described as the Harlem National Anthem. The New York Times reported on the concert as follows. Jimi Hendrix introduced his expanded review, Gypsy, Sons and Rainbows, at a benefit performance last night for the United Block Association. Neighborhood residents and a handful of young white rock fans stood for hours on 139th Street near Lenox Avenue to hear the singer and others, including the Sam and Dave Band, Big Maybell and J.D. Brown, perform for the Block Association, a poverty program unit that runs daycare centers and tutorial programs for its member associations. Mr. Hendrix, in white horsehair slacks, a cream-colored fringed buckskin jacket and a pink headband, said before the show that he had come to Harlem for personal reasons as well as to support the Block Association. Jimmy was quoted as saying, "Sometimes when I come up here, people say I play white rock for white people. Well, I want to show that music is universal, that there is no white rock or black rock. Some of these kids haven't got the $6 to go to Madison Square Garden. Besides, I used to play up here myself at Smalls over 135th and 7th. While in a review for Circus magazine, Chris Hodenfield wrote, "The Harlem concert was the greatest I'd ever seen him do. Hendrix had enthusiasm and willingness to boogie. For the finale, he played a warped, high-screech version of the Star-Spangled Banner, which went dripping and screaming into dissonancy. Coming back from that, he said, 'Now we're gonna play the Harlem National Anthem,' and stepped on his trusty wah-wah pedal for a dynamite version of Voodoo Child, Slight Return. Towards the end, he turned and flew into the amplifier, chipping off a corner, but he came bouncing back with a big smile and a peace sign as if to say, 'Yeah, but don't forget.' He did this again, much to the cheers of the street. He shot everyone a black power fist, which got some reaction, and then a peace sign, which got even more of a response. And then, to top it all off, he flipped everyone another sign which sort of brought the sky down. He is a master performer when he wants to be one, and this concert gave him the necessary inspiration." Saturday, the 6th of September, at the Hit Factory in New York, Hendrix worked on several tracks, including Valleys of Neptune, Blues for Me and You, Love a Man, and Trying to Be. Then Monday 8th. Jimmy held auditions for new musicians at the Salvation Club in New York. This process likely spanned several days, with this date being an approximate reference point. Tuesday, the 9th of September, Jimi Hendrix and his band, featuring Mitchell, Cox, and Juma Sultan, performed Isabella and Machine Gun at ABC TV studios in New York for the Dick Cavett Show. This appearance, which included an interview with Dick Cavett, marked Hendrix's third and final appearance on US television. According to music author John Platt, Hendrix had retained Billy Cox from the Woodstock lineup, and in Mitch's absence, coupled with a desire to play with other people, particularly those he had known for a long time, Buddy Miles did indeed seem the obvious choice. They'd played together on and off for the previous year or so, mainly in the studio, and once or twice, Buddy had played on stage with them, as at Winterland, and Jimmy had jammed with Buddy's band, The Express. Wednesday, the 10th of September, at odds with Mike Jeffrey over the direction of his career, and indeed against Jeffrey's wishes, Jimmy volunteered to perform at the Salvation Club New York with his Gypsy Sons and Rainbows. Set list for the evening: Jam Back at the House, Untitled Instrumentals, and Isabella. According to John McDermott, just as they had done earlier that summer, jamming at the Tinker Street Cinema in Woodstock, Hendrix cruised, trading riffs and solos with Lee while pulling back to integrate Sultan, Velez, and Mitchell's polyrhythmic interplay. Rock music's most visually dynamic artist, Hendrix just stood on stage, barely emitting a trace of emotion. Midway through the set, many patrons, content with a glimpse of Hendrix, and sure that the exhibition was certainly not an experience-style concert, actually left. The Salvation gig had been a disaster, and Gypsy Sons and Rainbows, his grand vision, had performed their final concert. Hendrix at Salvation, the Rock Magazine Review. The appearance of Jimi Hendrix at Salvation last Wednesday night was the best-kept secret in New York City. Only a small handful of press showed up, despite invitations sent out by the club, and though, thanks to the scene column in the Village Voice, a good many kids waited for hours queued up against Salvation's one-way mirrored door, only a select few were admitted. Though unfair, the management's discrimination made for a more relaxed audience, and a more receptive one. At 10 o'clock, when the press party was to begin, several members of Jimmy's new entourage were climbing the stage, busily setting up equipment and fiddling with the sound system. By 11, Jimmy had shown, said a few words to Savoy Brown, and ducked into a corner, surrounded presumably by managers, PR types, and groupies of assorted sizes and colors. To while away the time, records began to play. Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields Forever, and a good deal of the band came on for the next hour as the club began to fill up. At 15 past midnight, just as many press people began to leave, Jimi Hendrix, wearing a yellow Indian embroidered shirt and a well-trimmed afro, came on stage. He was followed by an ebullient elf-like Mitch Mitchell, looking as though he could hardly wait to get to those drums, a tall African drummer, a new bassist, and a second lead guitarist. Although one might have wished the old experience back, when it was Jimmy in velvet and lace, and Noel and Mitch amid a purple psychedelic haze. The men who played with him that night were excellent musicians informally jamming, unfortunately before a crowd expecting a trip into Electric Hendrix land. Jimmy began the set with an untitled instrumental that quickly turned into a jam. He did not resort to his usual gymnastics, which made him one of the great live performers in rock. Instead, he stood calmly, almost statuesque, the combination of leanness and posture contributing more to his role as the super heavy weight of rock than his copulation rites ever did. Mitch Mitchell sat, mouth wide open, flailing away at his drums. Taking a solo, receiving well-deserved applause, the African drummer kept a frantic beat, and the bass player sadly could barely be heard above the din. Alternating with Jimmy, the second lead guitarist took half the leads, and he was wonderful, providing a good foil for Jimmy, who did his spectacular thing, often with the help of his trusty wah-wah pedal. When Jimmy was allowed to take over, the room simply rocked with sound. The set continued with jam songs, and the audience, waiting for Foxy Lady and Let Me Stand Next to Your Fire, grew impatient and disappointed. It was sad to see Hendrix, creating a series of superb informal compositions, being condemned by a horde of $10 paying customers, who finally chose to walk out. What had prevented vocals in the beginning, namely a broken sound system, was finally cleared up. A mic brought forth, and Jimmy went into Isabella. The next song was his last, and as he drew to a close, he thanked what was left of his audience, took his guitar from around his neck, set it on top of an amplifier, and walked off stage. A gig he may not have been too eager to do in the first place had turned into a disaster, and it wasn't his fault. Hendrix fans who dug his experience before had better prepare themselves for this one, because though robbed of pomp and splendor, Hendrix is socking it to you, and it's not coming from the crotch. There is no guitarist like him anywhere, which is for the moment to disregard the giants of the blues. He generates an excitement as well as an excellence, and that, as the sages say, is what rock is all about. Sometime between 9th and the 11th of September, Jimi Hendrix jams on bass with the band Mountain at Ungano's in New York City. The exact date of this session is uncertain, but it occurred within this time frame. Saturday, the 13th of September. Hendrix has a jam session back at the Shoken House with Mike Efron on electric clavichord and Juma Sultan. To Mike Jeffries' ceaseless frustration, the experience had disbanded just as the group was enjoying its most lucrative paydays. With Hendrix's plans unclear, Concerts West quickly scheduled a mini-tour across the South, planning 10 concerts in 11 days from September 19th to 29, 1969. However, just before advertising and ticket sales were set in motion, Hendrix refused to comply. Additionally, Jeffrey had booked Hendrix for another major outdoor concert on the Boston Common. By all accounts, Jeffrey's handling of this gig caused significant ill will. According to Ron Terry of Concerts West, there was no real purpose for dates at that point, except that Jeffrey was overextended and needed money. A lot of weird stuff was going down. Jeffrey was trying to get deposits sent to him personally instead of to Concerts West. That worsened the paranoia between him and Hendrix. This culminated in a letter prepared by Hendrix's lawyer, Henry Steingarten, and signed by both Steingarten and Hendrix, declaring that Jimmy was withdrawing from all his tour commitments. It stated, "At a meeting with Jimi Hendrix today, it developed that Jimi Hendrix is not well enough at this time to undertake the contemplated tour, scheduled to begin September 18th. Also, the group which Hendrix had put together has temporarily disbanded, and the date when it will be reformed is uncertain, probably not before next spring." Steingarten urged Hendrix to fulfill the dates, warning him that his reputation could suffer and the financial implications might be substantial, to which Jimmy responded that his reputation as a musician was paramount, and since he did not feel physically and mentally capable of performing satisfactorily, he believed that overshadowed any failure to appear. Monday, September 15th. At the record plant in New York, Jimmy works on tracks including Sky Blues Today, Villanova Junction, and Burning Desire. This session also marked the departure of Larry Lee from the band. Wednesday, September 17th. Hendrix gives an interview to the New Musical Express, then Thursday, September 18th. The concert scheduled for the Summer Thing Festival on Boston Common was cancelled. Instead, Hendrix had further jam sessions and rehearsals at the Shoken House in New York with Mike Efron. Friday, the 19th of September, and the kidnapping incident, according to Hendrix authors Harry Shapiro and Caesar Glebbeek. In one of the more bizarre incidents in his life, Jimmy was kidnapped out of the Salvation Club one night by unidentified hoods claiming to be mafia. He allegedly left the club with these guys to score some drugs, strange in itself if true, when drugs were being pushed on him all the time. Next thing he knew, he was whisked off to an apartment in Manhattan. The following morning, these guys told him to phone Mike Jeffrey. Bob Levine, who took the call in the office at the time, was told that Hendrix was dead unless Jeffrey handed over Jimmy's contract. Opinions have differed as to who was behind this incident and the alleged motives, or whether it even actually happened. Trixie Sullivan, who worked for Mike Jeffrey, supports the story that the kidnap was real enough, stating that the music business in those days was like the Wild West, and that the junior mafia was always trying to move into the music business, and Jimmy was kidnapped by some guys that were holding him for ransom to get his contract. Mike Jeffrey had his contacts in the music business, which could be quite heavy too, so Mike found, or was introduced to, people who were capable of sorting it out. And that's exactly what happened. Whoever was responsible, this incident helped put Jimmy's growing paranoia over who he could really trust into overdrive. While Hendrix researcher John McDermott had this take on the event, following his Salvation Club performance, Hendrix left with Bobby Woods to escape the crowd and score some drugs. Their acquaintance had been one of convenience, and on this occasion, Hendrix ended up spending the better part of the early morning with him, an association that would carry repercussions. Although he spent the night with Bobby Woods, recalls Bob Levine, he really didn't know who he was. To Jimmy, he was just a nice guy who sold cocaine. The next night, Woods was found murdered, gangland style. The boys knew Hendrix had spent the night with Woods and wanted to know what he had heard from him. Hendrix hadn't heard anything about their business, but they had to make sure. Making sure translated to abducting Hendrix and taking him upstate, where he was questioned and held against his will. At the end of the day, though, according to Jim MARRON, manager of the Electric Lady Studios, Hendrix, who was the subject of this intrigue, found the entire episode silly. He was kind of amused by it all, he recalled. Saturday, the 20th of September, cancelled concert, Municipal Auditorium, Atlanta. Instead, on a rare quiet weekend at the Shoken House, and with all the intruders gone, Jimmy actually managed to have the place to himself with some musician friends and is interviewed by Sheila Weller from Rolling Stone. In Rolling Stone's interview with Jimmy, headlined, "I Don't Want to Be a Clown Anymore," Sheila Weller explores the contrast between Hendrix's public image and private self. She wrote, "The media often paints Hendrix as a rock demigod, highlighting his flamboyant stage presence and mythologizing his persona. However, Hendrix's life at his Georgian-style Shoken home in upstate New York showed a different side. There, he gathered a diverse group of musicians for peaceful creative growth, despite facing local police harassment, hangers-on, and pressure from commercial representatives." During a quiet September weekend visit, Weller describes Hendrix as fragile and self-effacing, displaying a vulnerability contrary to his public persona. He is seen as a thoughtful, humble individual, concerned with creating new music and collaborating with avant-garde musicians. Hendrix expresses frustration with the pressures of fame and a desire to move beyond being a rock and roll star, aiming instead for artistic and spiritual growth. The article details Hendrix's sessions with other musicians, his affinity for various music genres, and his hope to write songs about tranquility and beauty. Despite the challenges and demands on his time and energy, Hendrix maintains a sense of calm and humility, focusing on his art and close friendships. Sunday, the 21st of September, cancelled concert, JLA Fronton, Miami. Monday, the 22nd of September, cancelled concert, St. Bernard Civic Auditorium, Chalmette. On Tuesday, September 23rd, Hendrix was at the record plant in New York, working on tracks like Valleys of Neptune, Message to Love, Jam Back at the House, Drinkin' Wine, and Isabella. The next day, Wednesday, September 24th, he continued at the record plant, focusing on Power of Soul and Stepping Stone. On Thursday, September 25th, Hendrix remained at the record plant, where he worked on Keep on Groovin', Sky Blues Today, and Room Full of Mirrors. Friday, September 26th, saw Hendrix back at the record plant, where he worked on Message to Love, Valleys of Neptune, Nightbird Flying, and Stepping Stone. The following concert dates, as previously discussed, were cancelled. Saturday, September 27th, at Will Rogers Coliseum, Fort Worth. Sunday, September 28th, at Hemisphere Arena, San Antonio, and Monday, September 29th, at the University of Texas, Austin. On Tuesday, September 30th, at the record plant in New York, Jimi Hendrix jammed with Steve Stills, John Sebastian, Dwayne Hutchings, Buddy Miles, and Mitch Mitchell, with Jimmy playing bass. Later, he revisited Woodstock, where one take eventually became You Can Be Anyone You Want This Time Around, on Timothy Leary's album of the same name. Additionally, he worked on tracks like One More Day and $20 Fine. Leary's You Can Be Anyone You Want This Time Around earned Jimmy a rap over the knuckles from Warner's, and as a further complication, the recording was being produced by Stella Douglas's husband, Alan, owner of the jazz label Douglas Records. Needless to say, Douglas has been regarded as a controversial figure in the story of Jimi Hendrix, both while Jimmy was alive and posthumously, and there are many views on Douglas's relationship with Hendrix. Certainly, Jimmy was impressed with Douglas's recording credentials, which included jazz artists such as Eric Dolphy and John McLaughlin. Wednesday, the 1st of October, and Mitch Mitchell leaves for England, with plans to reunite with Jimmy in the spring, while Billy Cox returns after having fled in September, and Buddy Miles is brought in for rehearsals at Juggy Sound in New York. Then Thursday, the 2nd of October, record plant session with Lightning Rod and Buddy Miles. Friday, the 3rd of October, Jimmy disbands the Gypsy Sons and Rainbows. Mitch Mitchell is interviewed by June Harris for New Musical Express, published October 25, 1969. And Life magazine publishes an article on Jimi Hendrix, with photos by Raimundo de Lorraine, taken back in New York on April 8th. While Sunday, the 5th of October, marks the birth of James Daniel Sundquist, aka Jimmy Jr., born to Eva Sundquist in Stockholm, Sweden. Tuesday, the 21st of October, Jimmy sends a telegram to Paul McCartney with the message, "We are recording an LP together this weekend in New York. How about coming in to play bass? Peace, Jimi Hendrix, Miles Davis, and Tony Williams." Peter Brown, the Beatles' agent at the time, responded, "Paul McCartney is not in London. He is on vacation and won't be back for 2 weeks." McCartney, for his part, would not learn about the existence of this telegram until 2013. Then, towards the end of the month, between October 24th and 28th at the Sound Center, New York City, Jimmy is involved with recordings for the organisms. According to Hendrix researchers, Harry Shapiro and Cesar Glebig, it has become part of the Jimi Hendrix mythology that he was under pressure to form a black band. There may well have been demands from black nationalists that he should do this, but there is no evidence that he actually complied. With Gypsy Sons and Rainbows, Jimmy wanted to hang together with some friends from the less complicated old days, but he still wanted Mitch involved. With his next venture, the presence of 2 black musicians in a new trio format was sheer expediency. The name Band of Gypsys had been on Jimmy's lips for some time. Ex-Hendrix roadie Neville Chesters credits Mitch with its first utterance. "It was in a hotel one time in New York in 1968. There was always this continual entourage of people going back and forth along the corridor to Jimmy's room, and nobody ever saw Jimmy for 2 or 3 days at a time. And I remember one day Mitch saying, 'It's like an effing band of gypsies in here.' I remember it quite distinctly." That concludes this installment of the series. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we will begin the deep dive into November and December 1969 of the Jimi Hendrix story. Don't forget to subscribe for future content updates. And by the way, if you have any photos, stories, or anecdotes to contribute, we would love to hear from you. Until next time.